7. Seeing that Jaden was also one of the judges, I bit my lower lip slightly. There was no change in my expression, but my heart skipped a beat. There were only 3 judges in total. One was a former colleague who gave me preferential treatment, and the other was a current lover who had slept with me several times. There was only one person left with little power to reject me. It seemed that Roxanne was right. I would succeed in the audition steadily. Damn it. I was being pretentious. After the staff left, there was only the sound of 3 people breathing in the audition hall. Quaid glanced at Jaden and then looked at me with ambiguous eyes as he smiled. Natalie, we were just talking about your past. I frowned and looked at him in surprise. It almost occurred to me that Jaden looked unhappy just now. Was it because of what Quaid said? Quaid stared at me for a few seconds and suddenly raised his eyebrows. Why are you so nervous? I just talked with Jaden about the interesting things that happened while filming Monochrome and exchanged our thoughts. I didn't expect that he and I had many ideas about the movie, which were very co-productive, and he paused and looked at me with deep eyes. Suddenly, he lowered his eyes and laughed in a low voice. Our taste is the same. Even a fool could recognize what he meant. I bit my lips and did not understand what Quaid wanted to do. He did pursue me after he stopped filming Monochrome 5 years ago. Later, I saw him flirting with other women at the same time, but he looked indifferent. He calmly put on his clothes and did not even look at me. I've always been playing with you. So, what was going on presently? At that time, Jaden, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly said, Natalie, I won't do that to you. I suddenly looked at him, and my heart suddenly skipped a beat. I seemed to understand what he said, but I did not seem to understand what he meant completely. Suddenly, I remembered something. That day, I opened the door of the hotel. Quaid indifferently said that he was just playing with me. After that, the paparazzi and reporters followed closely behind him and squeezed in. That day, Twitter was exploding with the news. The famous singer yelled cursed and announced that his new album launch event would be postponed. At that time, Quaid was already a genius director in everyone's eyes, and I was just an ordinary and transparent person. The marketing accounts had written a lot about him and the woman, but my name was not even written in it. The whole time, I was written as an unknown actress. When I came back to my senses from the anger, I suddenly realized a problem. What did Jaden mean? I could not breathe, and my eyes were fixed on Jaden. In an instant, an almost impossible guess came out of my heart. Has he been paying attention to me since then? It did not seem impossible. After all, he had seen my part in Monochrome. Natalie, I'm not like him, Jaden repeated. His tone was as cold as his aura. It was as frosty as ice that could not be melted, but at the same time, there was some other meaning. I blinked and looked at him with my heart beating very fast. He looked at me. His eyes gradually turned from indifference to gentleness, and his thin lips opened lightly. He was sincere and confident. He's a jerk. I'm not. As soon as Jaden finished his words, a woman's laughter suddenly came from the door. Oh, has the audition started? Why didn't you wait for me? I looked back subconsciously, and then my pupils shrank slightly. The woman looked in her early 50s. She was bloated, dressed with jewelry, and had delicate and shiny skin which was well maintained. She looked exactly the same as the lady in Jaden's picture. My face turned pale, and my fingertips were cold. I did not expect that the third judge would be Jaden's girlfriend. When the woman saw me, she suddenly said, "T.S." She twisted her waist and walked over, looking at me from head to toe, and then smiled at Jaden and Quaid. This face alone can afford the title of bewitching concubine. I hurriedly lowered my head, and my heart trembled. What's more, I was embarrassed. Quaid laughed. Yes. When I first met Natalie, Jaden interrupted him and said in a cold voice, "Natalie, which scene are you going to show us?" I came to my senses like I had just woken up from a dream and looked up at Jaden. My thoughts were a mess. I did not understand why he could be so calm in such a terrible situation. Besides, he knew that the woman was also one of the judges. Why did he not remind me earlier and let me prepare well? I frowned. Something flashed through my mind, but it flashed by too fast that I did not know what it was. I suppressed the anxiety in my chest, took a deep breath, and tried to keep as calm as I could. I'm going to try out with the 7th scene. Jaden's girlfriend glanced at the script, pondered, and raised her eyebrows at Jaden. This is a famous scene in this movie. Why don't you act with her? Jaden, My pupils narrowed. The scene was technically intimate. But she, looking at her lazy and indifferent eyes. I bit my lips and felt ashamed. Sure enough, one could not judge a book by its cover. Perhaps only such a free and generous woman could make Jaden, who was indifferent and abstinent, crazy in love and officially publicize their relationship. I looked up at Jaden and saw that he was obviously stunned. Then he smiled at Suzette and said, "Okay," as he withdrew his gaze. The emotion in his eyes faded. It was 10 in the morning, on the 4th floor of the Splendor Studio. The auditions for the roles in Mr. Campbell's new film, Bewitching Concubine, were being held. Quaid Campbell, he was only 25 years old, and he was the youngest genius director in the circle. He had a unique style and was recalcitrant. In the past 5 years, he had only made 2 films. The first film was unpopular, and it was not well received. In the same year, with his second film, he swept up all of the major international awards and became famous. After finishing his second film, he suddenly went abroad to study and did not return home until recently. Now that he was making a big comeback, he could be said to be the most popular person in the eyes of the actors. I glanced over and found that the huge lounge was almost full of people, except for a few newcomers. Most of them were first-tier and second-tier actresses with popularity. It could be called the gathering of stars. While waiting, I suddenly heard 2 actresses whispering together. "Have you heard that this role has already been determined? Now it's just a process." I paused and looked away from the script. I looked up at them. The actress who was talking was called Roxanne. She looked pure and sweet, and her resources were also good. She was not good at acting, so her shows all flopped. The other actress was a little surprised and leaned toward her. "What? Who is it?" Before Roxanne could say anything, she seemed to think of something. Could it be Shiana? She became famous overnight because of the advertisement she acted in with Jaden. My eyes widened in shock, and my brain stopped working instantly. Was Jaden's old baby also in the entertainment industry? Roxanne shook her head. "It's not her." The other actress obviously did not believe it. "Shiana appeared out of the blue a month ago. Her first gig was to cooperate with Jaden. She became popular after 1 month of her debut, but there was no further capital to help her. Who will believe it? I heard that Jaden was her college senior, and they had a close personal relationship. Who else can it be but her?" The more I overheard their conversation, the stranger I felt. Was Jaden Shiana's college senior? I frowned. I was more certain that Shiana was not Jaden's old baby. Who was Shiana? Roxanne pursed her lips and spoke after a long while. "No matter how good Shiana's resources are, she can't be better than that someone who can read the script." Another actress was surprised. "Someone? Reading the script? What information did you get?" I stared at Roxanne with a bad feeling in my heart. Roxanne smiled, and a dark light flashed in her eyes. "Someone has been entangled with Jaden for a whole year. I thought she was in love with him. Just a week ago, the paparazzi caught her coming out of Mr. Campbell's room in a mess. If someone hadn't immediately suppressed the news, it would have become a piece of explosive news." The other actress's eyes widened suddenly. She did not understand. "So you mean Natalie?" A loud voice sounded at the door. The 2 people suddenly froze, looked at each other, and looked back at me in a daze. Their originally beautiful faces suddenly lost color. When the uniformed staff saw me, they immediately waved to me. "It's your turn." I stood up and walked out slowly. When I passed by them, I paused slightly and smiled casually. "If your acting skills were half as good as your gossiping skills, you would have won all the awards." After saying that, I walked straight to the door regardless of Roxanne's ugly expression. Bewitching Concubine was written by Suzette, a great scriptwriter for Splendor Corp. It took years for her to polish the script alone, and she deliberately invited Quaid to shoot it. It could be said that she wrote it to win an award. I came back for it a month ago, when I was relaxing abroad. I happened to meet Quaid. He was wearing a black trench coat with his hands in his trouser pockets, and his eyebrows were both familiar and strange. At first, he seemed a little surprised to see me, but a moment later, he smiled, and his brown eyes were glistening. "Natalie, I've been preparing for a movie recently. I'm picking the heroine. Do you want to read the script?" I narrowed my eyes at him, seeing that I did not speak. He looked at me more intensely, but the smile on his lips became more and more casual, and he approached me. "Don't think that I'm giving you preferential treatment. After reading the script, even if you are really interested in acting.